Is Eddie George NFL bound? Probably not, but his interview with the Chicago Bears is a huge deal because I think it leads to more opportunities for George. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel is making your NFL playoff experience more exciting and more enjoyable. All you have to do is put down a $5 bet. If it wins, you get $300 back in bonus bets. Go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. We'll wrap up today's episode with a slight tweak to the Division II football playoffs that I think kind of helps the CIAA, kind of helps the SIAC, but I'm not quite sure it's a huge help to either one of those conferences, in my personal opinion. In segment 2, Texas Southern has been the biggest surprise in HBCU basketball, in my opinion, but we're going to narrow it down because I think it's undebatable that they're the biggest surprise in HBCU women's basketball. But we kicked this thing off with something that caught me off guard, probably caught you off guard. I would say the majority of people who are not friends with Eddie George were caught off guard by the news that was broken by Jay Glazer. Eddie George interviewed for that vacant head coaching position with the Chicago Bears this weekend. But what does it really mean? Right? Like, what does this really mean? Because I think it could mean a lot of things, and we can have that conversation on this way or this way. And I think that there's a very narrow way of looking at it of, does he get the job, yes or no? I don't think that that is a large conversation. That's a yes or no question that I don't think really needs to be discussed, in my opinion. But Eddie George interviewed for the Chicago Bears head coaching position over the weekend. What does this really mean? Do I think that Eddie George gets this job with the Bears? No. Do I think that that's the important part about it? No, not at all. I will say it was surprising because George didn't make that jump to the FBS level. Let's talk about this on the HBCU landscape. On the HBCU landscape, George is often compared to Deion Sanders. Well, who else is talking about head coaching positions in the league this year? Deion Sanders, with mostly the Dallas Cowboys. Deion is talking about the Dallas Cowboys, people are talking about Deion with the Dallas Cowboys, and I think that's a lot about his relationship with Jerry Jones. But I don't think relationships are absent in the conversation or the connection between George and the Bears. We only really talk about connections when they're prominent, but connections are used in a lot of these situations. George did the Bill Walsh Fellowship with the Chicago Bears a couple of years ago. Do you think that's a coincidence? Because I don't. I think that they got to know George during that time frame. I think that they liked what they saw from George, liked the potential that they saw from George. And then now you come off of the 2024 season when Tennessee State has their best success, their best season under Eddie George. He was able to close out in the month of November. He did the things that we wanted him to do late in the year, got a co-conference championship, made it to the FCS playoffs. So if I'm Chicago and I like the potential that I saw with Eddie George in 2023 when his head coaching career was still in its infancy, and it still kind of is, to be honest. If I like that potential a couple of years ago, now I'm sitting here in 2025. I need a head coach. The least I could do is reach out and see, where's your mind at? I like what you've built on a collegiate level. I liked who you were as a person, as a leader when I saw you a couple of years ago. Let's have a conversation to see where we're at. Do I think that Eddie George gets this job? No. But what does it really mean that he interviewed for it? What it really means is that there's more opportunities on the way for George. Does this surprise anybody who's been paying attention? No, but I would also argue that now more people are paying attention. Eddie George interviewing with the Chicago Bears does not make him on most people's radar, in my opinion. I think he was already there. But there's going to be a few people on the collegiate level, on the FBS level, who say he's interviewing for the Bears, professional. Let's look at what Chicago, or excuse me, let's look at what Tennessee State did again. Let's look at what George has done again. Right? Because let's be real. There has been very limited reported chatter on what George, on George to the FBS level. There's been very limited reported chatter on Eddie George being in contention or being considered or being sought after by FBS programs. Right now, he's leading Tennessee State, and that seems to be the only place I've seen him really connected to. But now that he has this connection to the Chicago Bears, let me back it up. They haven't reported this chatter, but I do believe it exists. That's the point. They haven't reported this chatter, but I do believe that it exists. I do believe that people are interested in George. There are eyes on George. There's been very little reported chatter about Eddie George to the FBS level. That hasn't happened a lot. Okay, that does not mean that people are not interested. I do believe that with George's profile, with what George has done at Tennessee State, there are people who are interested in him. But at the same time, when you go interview for a professional job, there's going to be people who skipped over you, say, what's going on over there? I believe that Eddie George and what he's built at Tennessee State has brought a lot of eyes on him, has brought a lot of eyes on the program. Those eyes are different. For the program, is people just looking. For him, it's probably people looking for a potential job. But I believe that those eyes were there from FBS programs, whether that's positional coach, whether that's head coach, whatever it may be. I do think people are looking at Eddie George, the coach, in a different light after the success of the Tigers. But now that he goes and interviews with the Bears, there's people who weren't looking who are saying, why are the Bears interested? Why is an NFL team interested in Eddie George? You would like to think that most programs aren't having one foot in, one foot out with their head coaching, but that's just not realistic. There are people who understand that their coach is entering a make or break year and they're already looking for the next person, right? Like if we're going to if we're going to compare it to a relationship, there are people who are in a bad relationship and now they're looking for, okay, who am I going to go to next? I got my person. Boom, I'm going to leave this one. Like that's a real thing, right? I think we all know somebody who has done that, who has acted like that in some capacity. Whether it was, I'm young, so I mean, that kind of stuff was when I was a little bit younger, but it's still happening now. I just don't be talking about it with people. That's neither here nor there. Who cares what my personal life is like and what I talk about? But with George, those eyes, it just became more of them. That's it. That's the real deal. The real thing here is Eddie George has interviewed for the Chicago Bears job. Does that mean he gets it? No, but I do believe that puts him on a couple of radars. Will we see more NFL teams interview George? I doubt it this year. If he builds some things at Tennessee State, it still might be a tough sell, to be honest. I don't know. Maybe the Titans, if we're going to say something like that. I don't think that the Titans had a great year. They fired their GM. Their head coach probably is on thin ice. So maybe you just matriculate up the city of Nashville. Maybe that happens for George. But outside of the potential Tennessee Titan run, I don't necessarily know if you'll see too many coaches go from the FCS head coaching to a NFL head coach. I think that's rare and unrealistic on most examples, right? But what I will say is the FBS could come calling a little bit sooner. The FBS already had eyes on George. They already saw what Tennessee State did in 2024. They already seen the program that he's building. But I can guarantee you there's more people who are noticing, more people who are researching. Those who have noticed already noticed it's nothing new. And now there's going to be a couple of more people who are going to notice because of what happened with the Chicago Bears. That is the true impact of his interview with Chicago. Now, as we push forward, I want to look at Texas Southern because Texas Southern women's basketball, they are undefeated through 5 games. And this is the biggest shock to me in all of HBCU basketball. I didn't expect Texas Southern to start off so fast. But that's exactly what they did. And we're going to look at that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. This message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. So, with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all of the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least two players, and if your picks hit, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money for making just a few simple picks correctly. James Cook, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Austin Eckler is an interesting one. You're looking at Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley. I'm trying to go with all the running back duos, but Patrick Mahomes, Isaiah Pacheco, all of these guys. I just named you 8 people. Pick 2 or more, go more or less. It's all on you. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app and use the code Locked On College to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Football. The big game is tonight. It's going to be in a matter of minutes once I finish talking. So flip over to me and get a little bit of recap from Spencer McLaughlin on what's going on. Excuse me, a preview from Spencer on what's going on leading into this game. Texas Southern women's basketball has been the biggest surprise of HBCU basketball this season. And I don't think it's dramatic to say that. I don't think that I'm being hyperbolic. I don't think any of that, right? I think that legitimately, when you look at what they've accomplished so far, and I think that's the important thing before we get any further. So far is the operative words here. This is not a projection that Texas Southern is going to run through the SWAC. This is not a projection that they're going to go undefeated. This is not a projection of anything or a prediction, nothing. This is no foresight. This is only looking at what we've seen so far. I don't know what Texas Southern is going to do moving forward. I do not know that. But what I do know is that they currently sit 25. They currently sit 5-0 in the SWAC. And I think that that's very surprising because who expected them to be there at this point? I don't believe in celebrating early. I don't at all. Right? Like when you really, if you want to be honest, people will text me during a game and I'll be like, I won't even respond. I won't even respond to that person during the game because I'm always scared if I say something that we're going to end up having a situation where like a comeback happens or whatever we're celebrating isn't really what happened. Like I've been there before. So I'm superstitious though. So maybe that's just on me. But in general, this is just me celebrating and acknowledging, not even celebrating, but acknowledging what they've done so far in the season. And they've gone 5-0. And who expected them to go 5-0? It's not a big sample size, but it's a good enough sample size for us to say that Texas Southern has been playing like one of the better teams, if not the best team in the conference. Now, here's my thing. One of the most fun, I ain't gonna say aspects because it's not all the time, but one of the more fun occurrences is when I get to celebrate my alma mater, when I get to brag on my alma mater. I don't do it all the time, right? Like football, we don't really have a lot of chances to do it. Basketball, we have a lot of chances to do it. And I probably do it quite a bit during basketball season. I might be being a little bit delusional on that part. But in general, I just don't feel like I do a lot of bragging on Texas Southern. Even when the chances are there, I don't feel like I do it a lot. But today it's a chance where I get to do it. I'm very happy because Coach Skeet got them girls together. She does. And year 3 is looking like she's finally compiled the talent she wants, the staff she wants, and Texas Southern is hitting it head on. The reason I said that they're the biggest surprise is not only because no one expected them to be undefeated, no one expected them to be particularly good. They haven't been over the last 2 years, and right now they're in conversations with Norfolk State and North Carolina A&T. And I know people, what? They're not one of the 3 best. This isn't for me to say. But what I will say is that Norfolk State women's basketball, North Carolina A&T women's basketball, and Texas Southern women's basketball are the only 3 undefeated in conference, undefeated HBCU women's basketball teams in the FC or on the D1 level. That's it. Norfolk State, North Carolina A&T, Texas Southern. The only three teams that have undefeated records in their conference schedule on the Division I level. No one expected TSU to ever, at any point in the season, I don't care if it's 5 games, 4 games, 20 games, no one ever expected when conference play kicked in for Texas Southern to be mentioned side by side with Norfolk State and North Carolina A&T. The expectations for these three squads are drastically different. A&T and Norfolk State, they right there neck and neck. They were both projected to win their conference. A&T was projected to win the CIAA. The MEAC was a two-way tie between Howard and Norfolk State. But when you look at them last year, the Spartans, 15 seed, right? Not even not a first 4, not a 16, but a 15 seed. That tells you how good you are on the HBCU level, that in the big dance, you're able to get a 15 seed. You have to have some sort of strong season to be able to pull that off. A&T, they're fighting for late in the season. They're fighting for a championship in the CAA. They end up losing 3 rounds deep in the tournament. They go to the NIT. They end up going 3 rounds deep in that too. So you have postseason success. My point is that the Spartans and Lady Aggies, they expected to come in and be really good. Texas Southern, that was not the case. That was not the expectation for them. They were voted 9th. They finished 10th last year, and they were voted 9th. So for them to come out and go 5-0, yeah, I think that was a very impressive thing to do. But not only was it 5-0, they've also beaten some solid teams. So they started this thing off with beating Grambling. And Grambling's had their questions, no doubt. But that's still a very strong victory for TSU. Then they went on to beat Southern. They beat Mississippi Valley State. And then here goes the one that really has people piquing their interest, I'd say. It's the Jackson State victory. The TSU over Jackson State victory is the big one, because you knock off Jackson State, who knocked off Alabama A&M. And that felt like a power game, because I can't remember the exact. Let's see if I can get the preseason poll pulled up real quick. But I think that many people expected Alabama A&M to be the first place team. Oh, excuse me. It was Grambling, it was Southern, it was Alabama A&M. But I think that coming into the season, that was the feel. But as the year went on, I just feel like Don Thornton and the Lady Bulldogs gained a little bit of momentum. So maybe that's just my framing on that. But the point is, you go into the year, that's the preseason. Let's look at the standings right now. Texas Southern, Alabama A&M, Jackson State, Southern. That's the top 4 teams. Texas Southern is 5-0. Alabama A&M is 4-1. Jackson State is 4-1. Southern is 4-1. I need to read that again. Let me read that again. Texas Southern is 5-0, the only undefeated team. Jackson State is 4-1. Southern is 4-1. The only two teams, the only team that beat either one of those two teams is Texas Southern. So I think when you're looking at the resume, when you're looking at Texas Southern's resume on the women's basketball side, they have wins against Grambling, the team everybody thought was going to come in and grab that crown, right? Texas Southern wins in conference play. Because that's the other thing. We talk about Norfolk State, North Carolina A&T. Those two teams, they had good out-of-conference schedules. They had good performances out of conference. TSU did not. TSU won 1 game. They won 1 game out of conference. They went 1-10. They were losing to everybody. Now, granted, they have some tough games on here, but when they get into conference play, they kick it in. And when they get into conference play, let's go through the 5 games, because it's not as if they took the easy route. It's not as if everything was just peaches and cream for Texas Southern. That's not realistic. That's not what happened. That is not an accurate. That's not real. Let me not say it's not realistic. That is not an accurate description of how TSU's conference play is going. Because going 5-0 with a cupcake schedule, it's impressive, but at the same time, we're waiting for you to falter. But TSU has knocked off some squads that we had high hopes for. They knocked off Grambling, who is projected to win the conference. TSU knocked off Southern. That's their only loss of the season in conference play. They knocked off Valley. Then they knocked off Jackson State. That's their only loss in conference play. And they knocked off Alabama A&M. And Alabama A&M only has 1 loss in conference play. So now when we get TSU versus Alabama A&M on Saturday, January 25th, so this Saturday coming up, that's going to be a game that we're watching. But I refuse to skip over Alabama State. That's Thursday. But you're looking at TSU. They knocked off 2 teams who only have 1 loss, and that loss is to TSU. They knocked off Grambling, who for all of their struggles this year, you still had high hopes coming in, and that was the beginning. So you gotta use that to a certain degree. Maybe not give it the entire praise, but you got to give it some love to some degree. This is a very good season so far for TSU. TSU won one game, year one. They won 5 games last year, and TSU won 6 games last year. They won 5 already. Year 3 feels right. She's retooled her staff again, right? She's retooled the staff each of these years, but it feels like she has the right combo. You're looking at team-wise. If you're just looking at players, you got Courtlyn, Loudermill, you got Aaliyah Fauntleroy, you got Aaliyah Henderson. Those have been huge. Treasure Thompson has been a really good presence as far as a shot blocker to go with Jada Belton. So you have some new players, but Belton has been a holdover who I would argue of all the holdovers has been the most consistent. But those guards that I named in the beginning, that triumvirate of guards in the beginning, you have Henderson, who's been great at facilitation, at getting steals. But then you have, and she's averaged about 7-8 points a game. But then you have Loudermill and Fauntleroy, who they're in the double digits. They didn't even have 2 double-digit scores last year. So they're already improving there. Coach Skeet got these girls together. New team, new staff, new results. Let's go TSU. As we push forward, let's go into what has changed on the Division II landscape on their playoff teams as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, what we have is the divisional round over, and we're moving on to the conference championship. Oh my, oh my, oh my. I think that this matchup right here between the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs is everything that we've been looking forward to. The beautiful part about the AFC is that we have 4 teams. One didn't make the playoffs this year, but we have 4 teams who are always keeping our eye on. And if those 2 teams ever meet, it's high profile. Josh Allen versus Lamar just went down this weekend. Now we have Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes, and I expect the quarterbacks to be way more prominent. So you can put some money down on their passing yards this week if you wanted to. Or if you feel like James Cook is going to have another good week, you can put some money down on his rushing yards. On the NFC side, how many touchdowns will Saquon Barkley get? Jaden Daniels, how many yards will he get? These are great games, and I'm looking forward to it heavily. You just got to go to FanDuel.com. NFC, AFC Championship, basketball, tennis going on still. You make your choice. Go to FanDuel.com, and if you're new to FanDuel, you get $300 back in bonus bets if you put down a $5 winning bet. Go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. The Division II playoffs were the only playoff system that didn't have automatic qualifiers that was ran by the NCAA. That's interesting to me. That's changed now, and I think it should change because the idea that I win my conference and I don't get an automatic bid to the playoffs is insane to me. Like, I win my entire conference and I don't get in. Crazy. But the thing is, it's rare. Right? And remember, how I talked about this in the beginning. Do I think it helps the CIAA? Do I think it helps the SIAC? To a certain degree, yes. And this is my degree. I mainly operate within the FCS world. Like, if you're an everyday, you're fully aware that the majority of my show is about the FCS HBCUs. We will sprinkle, we'll talk about the Division II teams. Like, that's not rare that we'll do it, but it's not the basis of the show, right? So with that being the case, most of the HBCUs on the FCS level, they aren't respected, in my opinion. They don't get a lot of respect. Yeah, you come in, you win a conference like Howard. I think Howard won the conference last year and didn't make the final FCS top 25. I think that's what happened, if I'm not mistaken. I know they won the conference, but I don't think they made the top 25. But it's very few teams that I feel like are really respected. I think North Carolina Central is respected because of the things they've done, the ability to win a Celebration Bowl, then make it to the playoffs. I think that you do that in back-to-back years. They've had constant success. Jackson State for sure is respected. I'd say that, FAMU's coming off a down year, but I think that they were respected as well. But it's just not a long list of respected HBCUs on the FCS level, right? But on the D2 level, that's different. I always feel like they get the love. I don't feel like they get the shaft. I feel like they win and they make the playoffs. You don't have to question it. So, but let's get to this rule. So there's 15 conferences, 15 conferences on the D2 level, and there's 28 spots in the playoffs. The idea that every winner of a conference wouldn't get in, to me, is crazy. But it's happened. It's happened in 2022. Let's read this real quick. So the last conference champion who wasn't in the playoffs was Newberry College. They won the SAC, the South Atlantic Conference, in 2022. They won the conference and didn't get in. Okay, cool. But then you look at in 2020, or my bad, put 2020 aside, you look at 2019, these were the last times that a Division II conference didn't put anybody in. And that was the Northeast 10, and then also the Great Northwest. I have asterisks in my notes next to the Northeast 10 because along with the CIAA, the Great Lakes Valley Conference, and the PSAC, those are the 4 conferences who voted for this, or who are pushing for this initiative. So we know that they voted for it. My thing is, you got to say it affects the CIAA to a certain degree because they pushed for it. They're pushing for it. And if it affects the CIAA, you would assume it affects the SIAC in a sense that they're on the same kind of level. So you would assume that they would benefit both. So maybe there's a push. And this wasn't something that was passed by a large degree. This was a 60% passing. So what that means is 60%, that almost failed. That almost failed. One more vote the other way, and you probably looking at this not being the case. So in general, the way I look at this is, why was there opposition? Why was there even any sort of opposition to having an automatic qualifier for your division or your conference winner? There's 15 conferences and 28 spots. There's more than enough to go around, right? Like at 28 spots, you could almost average two representatives per conference, almost. And everybody isn't going to do that. So I don't understand the real opposition. Like, do you think your conference is going to get 5 teams in? And now, well, I can't get my 5th squad in, so I'm pretty upset about it. I just don't understand the opposition to this. But in general, sorry. I just had to do some math real quick. But I don't think that one vote off is correct math-wise. But the point is, it didn't take much. It was only at 60% of a passing. Easily could have went the other way. The CIAA thought enough of this to suggest it. Obviously, it benefits the SIAC. And then the idea that it was so many people against it, it brings me to the point that there was probably going to be a charge to where the CIAA and SIAC would have been the first teams that were left out the conversation, right? Like, those would probably been one of the conferences that get left out for automatic qualifiers. And that's why it's sort of a benefit. But in general, it's not like we've been in this position where the HBCUs haven't been in a Division II playoffs. And I feel like they're just, in general, more respected. So I don't think it's a huge benefit, but it is a nice little security blanket, and it's one that the CIAA pushed forward. So tomorrow, we'll be looking at the lack of representation in these big-time bowl games, these pre-draft bowls, the Shrine Bowl, the Senior Bowl. They both only have one HBCU player. So I'm going to break that down as we go on to tomorrow. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.